Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here to debut Sharper. So, this is a con artist movie, and the further and further we go into this film, I was like, alright, like, this is a really interesting story. You do have to go on and invest a little bit of time to understand, like, okay, where is this movie going? But then once you start, like, oh, okay, here's what this movie is about, then you're like, oh, okay, I can get into this film. But it just has this kind of, like, weird start of the film. So, we go on to find that this movie focuses mainly on a character named Sandra. And so Sandra goes on to, in the early parts of this movie, meet up with a guy named Max, who's played by Sebastian Shaw. And there's a one part of the scene where we, of course, have Max going on and asking Sandra a question. And they all of a sudden just have this, like, really in-depth conversation about this whole thing. And then the girl's like, wow, like, you know quite a bit about this. And we would, of course, have Max say, it's like, I don't know anything about that at all. And the girl's like, oh. Going on and telling you, like, where this movie is just heading. And to kind of tell you, like, how good these characters can go on and be, or just kind of be able to serve back the ball as it is to be served to them. So, like, it's a whole kind of conversation kind of thing. Like, we even have, at certain points, we would have, like, VH1 at one point did, like, pickup artist things, which I actually did watch, I'll admit that. Because I was just kind of fascinated by, like, approaching, like, trying to pick up women and having this kind of, like, set way of talking to them. And I thought that was just kind of fascinating, even though, like, there's often a lot of times where you're just like, but yeah, but I want to be a real person. Like, I don't want to just kind of be this, like, robotic kind of, like, set of things and so on and so forth. But anyways, so we come to this film and we start to find in this movie that there's a pattern of these kind of long cons. And so we have Max at a certain point who's to meet up with his mother, and his mother is going to start to have work for him to do, as well as Max is going on and having Sandra go and do her thing. So we'll come to find out further as we have Tom being introduced in the beginning of this film, and he is to actually be tied to Richard, who is going to be his father in this film. And so, yeah, so we just kind of take some very interesting ways that this movie plays out. So, with that said, I thought that this movie was actually a good film. I thought it was actually almost a solid good film. If anything, I would probably go on and just kind of complain about possibly the same normal actors. As I'm never really a fan of, like, Julianne Moore, because often she is to just be a character that is to seduce somebody or be seduced by them. So there is always that in every single one of her movies, for the most point. Even in the Hannibal movie, where she, of course, is to be Clarice. And we have, like, Ray Liotta that's like, I want me a piece of that Clarice. And it's like, really? Okay, all right. Like, when did all of a sudden, like, this movie all of a sudden have people just be like, like, I'm going to see, like, Clarice as a sex symbol? That seemed very weird. But so, moving on. So, this movie, of course, is supposedly available on Apple TV or Apple Plus or whatever goofy thing that is. And I will go on and give you another app that hopefully you can in fact be able to watch this film. I think currently it has the theater bootleg version of this movie on there, but I think at some point it'll transition over when Apple TV is to have this film. And so if you want to just kind of delay in watching it or whatever, or if you feel that the version that you'll get is good enough, then check it out. Or go on to Apple TV, whatever goofy thing that it's called. But so, with that said, uh, what app of which that I can go on and recommend you, because I don't think I said that. Zelifonic, Zelifonic. Zelifonic. So, I think it's about that time to just double five this bad boy up and go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So, like, the further and further that I go on and try to explain this movie, I feel like I'm giving it away. And really, this is a long con movie that has a number of long cons, start to see the pattern that emerges. So with that said, let's go into this. So, in the very beginning of this film, we have a character that's focused first, that is to be Tom. And then we'll start to see these, like, kind of transitions where we focus on Sandra's character, and then Max's character, and Madeline's character, and so on and so forth. And we're kind of chopping up all these stories as they tell you where the transitions are to head. So, let's do this. We have Tom that is working at this bookstore, and he manages it himself. And we come to find that this girl comes in, and she is to ask for this certain book because she's working on her thesis. She mentions that she is to go to MIT, and we of course have Tom was like, wow, like, I'm very impressed by this girl, as she just flies out this whole, like, thing that she's working on, and Tom was like, okay, all right, okay. Very intelligent. So Tom goes on and is to ring up this girl behind this counter, and she then all of a sudden doesn't have this card. She's kind of maxed out on it. And we have Tom who's like, well, hey, like, I feel like I can trust you. Like, hey, here's this book so you can use it for your classes, and you can just kind of get me the money whenever you have it. And so the girl's like, oh my god, like, yeah, I'll definitely go in and I'll pay you for this. And Tom is like, well, yeah, like, I kind of figure that anybody would probably go on and just buy this online anyways. And so, yeah. So, because Tom, this bookstore owner that probably isn't going all that well, we even have Tom's father that mentions, like, how much of a mistake that business was. But we would come to find that Tom just enjoys being surrounded by books, and so kind of just let him have it. So, before Tom lets this girl absolutely go, he's like, well, hey, like, there's this kind of Chinese joint, if you would like to accompany me to eat there, like, hey, it's my treat. And the girl's like, well, like, I am single, but I like to stay that way. And Tom was like, oh, okay. So the girl walks off and she has the book in hand and she's going to pay Tom back. So by the time that Tom closes up for the day, all of a sudden this girl comes back. She's like, well, hey, I have the money. Like, here you go. And Tom was like, oh, I didn't even think that you would, like, come back so soon with this. She's like, no, I really wanted to pay you back. So we have this girl go on and realize, like, you know what? Like, here's the thing. Like, when you went on and you asked me about going out, going in to eat together, honestly, like, I just kind of panicked in my brain. Like, I realized that this was possibly a mistake. Like, how about we just go on, and how about we just eat? How about we just go on and go? And it's like, well, yeah, like, why can't it just be that simple? But there's always to be, like, the mind games that always play in people's heads, as it's like, well, yeah, this should always just be that simple. Like, well, hey, you're single, I'm single, let's do this. But yeah, like, that's always the goofy thing. is it never comes out to be that simple. And especially when you have certain things out there in the air now, it even makes it even more difficult than it ever was. But still. So, and you don't know if the Booger Man is at any corner. So that's always how it has to be, right? It's the Booger Man. So we have this girl that goes on and eats at this restaurant with Tom. There's probably a whole entire reason why I'm not even going on and stating this girl's name right away, even though she has one, and she's to be a pretty good focus of this film. There's a reason for that. So Tom ends up eating with this girl, and so he mentions that his mother had died fairly recently, but his dad had gone on to kind of quickly find another woman, and so Tom, it seems, was to be a writer, and when Tom was to be pressured into writing his first book, he miserably failed, and so he ended up instead talking to his dad, and they had come together to have Tom do this bookstore. And so Tom is just really happy that he was able to just be surrounded by books every day. So now we go on and we tell this girl's story. So we come to find out that this girl was to have both of her parents die when she was young, and so she was orphaned, and we would come to find that she had a brother that she was in this system with, which is honestly very rare, because I think oftentimes we would find out that certain orphaned like kids would not always be together, but it is what it is. So we have this girl that goes on to at some point state that she had been adopted by this one family, and she had found this one book, and it was to be this like Jules Verne or like Jane Earl book, and she goes on to start reading this book, and she realized that this book and her were like very similar in a lot of ways, and we'd have Thomas who's like, oh my god, all right. So Thomas goes on and like, well, hey, you need to come with me to this store. And the girl's like, oh, okay, that sounds a little weird. So Tom goes all the way into the store to hand this girl this book, and it comes to find out be the same author, and he's like, wow, like this is some kind of bizarre-ish Kinsmith kind of thing. And so they all of a sudden kiss, and we realize that these two people are like this. They're just like, they're so good with one another, or good, like it just seems like they're soulmates. They just like everything is to work out. The dominoes are just to fall perfectly on these two people. It's amazing. We even have at one point where Tom is to have this birthday party, and his friends are there, and they're going on like, wow, like it seems like you two are like have been together for like months instead of just days, and like, yeah, I know, it just works that way. It's just so weird. So we come to find the longer and longer that these two are together, the more that they're humping and jumping and whatever on one another, so that everything is just going so smoothly that they go on and tell one another that they definitely like one another, but I don't think they even say the love word. So we have at one point where this girl goes on to mention to Tom, after the two of them are consistently at her place rather than Tom's, and she goes on to ask him why. And Tom mentions like, well, yeah, like I don't really like to like be at home all that often because reasonably, like with my dad was to say that was a disappointment. And in some ways, yeah, there's a lot of people that can probably go on and feel that way. That a lot of times you just realize that you probably are to be a disappointment to your parents. But then it's just like, oh well, like if you go on and you find a better version of whatever, then that's fine. Um, yeah. So we have Tom that is to talk further with this girl. So this girl goes on to mention that she, of course, is to have this foster brother, and at certain points, this brother is to get in deep with these unsavory characters that like to probably like to go on and threaten of breaking kneecaps or breaking thumbs or whatever the usual thing is for a lot of lone shark like characters. So we have a point where this girl goes on and tells Tom about her brother, and so we have Tom who's just like, well, like how much does he own? How much is does he how far is he deep, so to speak? So we have the girl that's just like, well, like I can't go on and just ask you for this money because like it's enough to rob a bank kind of money. And Tom is just like, how much is it? So the girl is like, well, it's $350,000. And the guy is like, well, okay, like I think I can go on and I can get that money, so that way that can all just be resolved. And here's the thing, though, it feels that like in my brain, I would just be like, well, like wouldn't this character just go on and just do that again? Like, will it never stop? Is what I would probably assess if this person has this pattern of doing this. It's kind of like a drug addict in a way. But so, kind of like a lot of people that would go on to kind of do all kinds of number of things. And it's horrible. But yeah, like just some people go on and just decide to do these kinds of things. I don't know. But so we go into the story, and so Tom is to give the girl the money, and immediately I'm like, oh no, I think I know where this is going. And so once this girl goes on and gets the money from Tom, and the girl's like, well, yeah, I'm definitely going to go on and pay you every cent back. Tom's like, don't worry about it. And so as the girl is to go on and give her money to the brother, supposedly, we then have Tom that is to kind of wonder what had happened to his girlfriend. And so he's like, okay, it seems like she hasn't been answering my phone calls. And so, like, I'm going to go to her place and kind of knock on her door. It seems like I can't get into her place. And this girl has now ghosted Tom. And he's like, man, I was just robbed. Like, somebody just robbed this from me. So we then transition into another character. So we have a character named Sandra, who is to be wearing dreadlocks, and so she's on parole from this cop, and she's at this bar. So the parolee is talking to Sandra, or the parolee officer is talking to Sandra, and talking about how this girl is to be working at Starbucks and all these things. But the further and further the pro leads to talk to this girl, it's like, well, hey, like, you haven't been to Starbucks in about a month. And the girl's like, well, yeah, because I've had a disagreement with this manager and so on and so forth. And also that this girl is, like, possibly going to be on drugs. So Max, who is also at the bar, is to be listening to all of this. It's like, well, hey, like, how about I go on and how about I help out? So Max, it seems, is to drop every bit of all the money he has, and which is like $400 or something like that. And so Max is to drop this watch, and this is to seemingly be a fairly expensive watch. And like, we have this like parolee officer that's like, wow, like, I'm getting a bribe here. So at first, like, the officer is kind of like not really interested, but then like the parolee officer is like, well, wait a minute, like, how about you and I? How about we just kind of have this conversation over here? So they start to bargain, and so we go and have the parole officer, who is to take the watch in exchange for money, because this girl is going to go and pawn off this watch, which is a really high-end watch, to then have this be like a couple of thousand that this guy gives Max's character. So come to find out, when Max leaves with Sandra, he then goes on and puts the exact same watch on, and Sandra's like, oh my god, like, that watch isn't real, is it? And he's like, of course not, but I'll give you like your pay to kind of just shut you up. So Max goes on and gives her $1,000, and so he's like, well, hey, you're gonna live with me. You're gonna live with me. I'm gonna train you, and you're gonna learn from me. So Max ends up telling Sandra, it's like, well, hey, you better be clean, and because if you slip again, like, I'm never gonna trust you. So we have Max that goes on the very next day and is talking to Sandra, and Max is to say, it's like, well, hey, like, how about we just kind of do some conversational things, and what's your favorite movie? And so Sandra is to talk about her favorite movie is Titanic, and Max is like, oh, all right, okay. So Max goes on and be like, well, yeah, like, that's like DiCaprio's like best work. It's great. And we have Sandra like is like, well, like, but he was in Departed though, and like Max just like, but no, but like, really, like, Titanic, that, no, that's still the best. And so we start to have Sandra that is talking about like Kate Winslet and all the characters that are in the movie, and so Max starts like talking more and more that he just really like, yeah, but I'm just really interested in Titanic, and I'm just really interested in what you were talking about. And Sandra's like, wow, like, you really know quite a bit about this film. And Max is like, I've never seen a film in my life. Like, I feel like it's a waste. And Sandra's like, oh my god, like, wow, like, you really knew how to talk to me as if you knew everything about this film and you knew nothing. And he's like, well, yeah, like, that's what I'm going to teach you. That's how you're going to learn how to, like, just kind of, bounce back the ball of which that you were given. So we start to have Sandra, who is to read these newspapers and is to start coming up with her own backstory, to the point of it seeming that she is to use this backstory over and over and over again, to the point of her getting it down pat. And so Max is to go on and consistently just keep drilling in this whole like conversation thing, and just kind of changing certain pieces or parts there, and so on and so forth. So to the point of Sandra like really kind of picking up on this, and while she's eating, she's kind of really going on to like have this whole conversation and so on and so forth. So we get to the point where like Sandra is so good at this now that Max is like, okay, how about you and me? Like, how about we go out to dinner together? And so Sandra's like, okay, great. Come to find out, this is actually Max's birthday, and he's like, all right, like, let's just have some fun. We had also at one point had Sandra slip as she was also to find out that she was to have quite a bit of money, and so she used that money on drugs. Max was to kick her out, but then she was to beg and plead to try and get Max to take her back, and so he did. But now we're back at this birthday thing because I forgot about the whole that scene there. So Max is to go on and talk to Sandra, and they're just enjoying their time together. And Max is like, okay, like, well, here's the thing. I sent you here so you can go on and find somebody, and like you go off and like you get into his pants within the next 40 minutes. So the girl's like, oh, I thought we were just having this really nice conversation here, and Max is like, no, like I'm like you're on the clock. So the girl goes on and meets with this guy, and she is like, well, hey, like I hate kind of drinking alone, so hey, guy, like, would you like to share a drink with me? The guy's like, oh, okay, sure. So we have these two. It works out. She ends up going to this elevator, and so what all of a sudden happens is while they're kind of talking, they're in this elevator together. We all of a sudden have Max that barges in as this very jealous lover that, of course, was to be her ex-lover, supposedly. And so we, of course, have Sandra that is to work it out that, like, well, hey, like, just give us a couple of minutes and we'll talk things out. And the guy's like, oh, okay, all right. So when the guy leaves, both Sandra and both this guy are kind of thumbing through this guy's stuff, and it's like, oh, okay, like this guy evidently is married, and so he's probably using Sandra as this kind of wham bam thank you ma'am situation. So because we find these like diamond earrings, and so he's like, oh, okay, we're gonna steal these, we're gonna take this, we're gonna take that. So we have Sandra and we have Max who kind of lock lips together, and we have Sandra that's telling Max like, hey, happy birthday. So we come to find that that first con worked out. So we then have that all build up to at some point having Sandra go on and do the con that she just did in the early part of this film with Tom. So we then go on and transition to Max's character, tell more of his story. So Max makes his way to meet up at his mother's place, Madeline, and so we come to find out that Madeline is with another guy named Richard, who of course is not actually Max's father. It's just something that's like, okay, like Madeline is to find this guy and things are to work out. So Max ends up going on to talk to Madeline, and is to state like, well, hey, like could I just kind of hang out here for a couple of days? And Madeline's like, well, are you on drugs? And Max is like, no, I'm not on drugs. And so he's wanting to tell her, it's like, yeah, I'm definitely on drugs. Like, you can go ahead and like test the urine right now. I'll just pee in a vase and you can test it. And so he goes on and just pees in this vase, and he like puts it in her face. He's like, test it. And so Madeline is to just kind of tear up. So we have, while Madeline and Richard are together, we have Max is just like, all right, okay. So Max spends a little bit of time with Richard, and we have them just kind of eating breakfast together, like having a little bit of small talk. So when Madeline and Richard like come home one night, we all of a sudden find that Max is to have the cops on him. And so we have both Richard and both Madeline witnessing this and like, oh my god. So Richard is to go on and want to pay off this cop for this all to just go away. And so Richard is like, well, hey, how about $1,000? So like, So Madeline stops all this and she's like, wait a minute. Like, Max is kind of known for going on and doing these little con bits. And like, Max, just stop all this. And so, yeah, we do find out that the cop is to be fake. And so this guy just kind of runs off. And Richard's like, well, yeah, like, you better run before I call the real cops. And so Richard goes on and tells Max, like, well, hey, like, if you ever go on and do a con again, like, make sure it's for a lot more money than $1,000. And so Richard goes off. So we then go on to find that Madeline is to be talking with Max. And the longer that we find that they're talking, we start to realize that Madeline is to not actually be Max's mother. If anything, they are to more be like a couple. As Madeline is to get on top of Max and start kissing him, it's like, oh, okay, so like, this is another con that she's just working this guy. And Madeline even makes the joke that she doesn't really even like older guys and so on and so forth. So, and she's just using Richard here, sadly. Sadly, John Lithgow is to be used in this film horribly. So, Madeline is to tell Max, like, well, hey, like I want you to really help me out here. And so we have at one point where Max is to go on and meet with Richard. And so Richard, I feel, is just a guy who is to kind of pay everybody off because he's rich anyways. So Richard meets with Max, and so Richard is to tell Max, like, well, you know what? Like, I feel that I'm going to go on and give you an opportunity, Max, to give you, like, $65,000. Like, I think that should go on and give you, like, a substantial, like, career. It's like, well, yeah, if you probably think, like, the average, like, minimum wage kind of person probably gets, like, maybe $10,000 a year, maybe, if you're lucky. And that's if you're probably a full-time person. Because you're very lucky if you get that kind of money. But so we come to find that Richard is to, like, want to talk to Max and just give him money to do what, not sure, but just kind of give him money. So Max is like, well, hey, how about you give me what I was going to make for that whole entire year? How about you just give me that money now? And, like, I'll just disappear. And Richard is like, sure, like, that'll work even better. And so Max is looking at Richard, and Richard's like, well, like, I'll wire you the money. And Max is like, no. Like, I don't want to go on and have, like, taxes being taken from that or whatever. Like, no, I want like that whole money in cash, all of that money. So Richard's like, okay, I can do that. So Richard goes on and is to give Max the money, and so now Max, Madeline, and the cop that was there before, they are all going into this bar and they're all dancing. They're like, "Yeah, we did it. Yeah, this worked. Yeah, we we pulled this con." And it's like, well, yeah, it was only like $65,000. Again, you should probably go for a much more bigger sum of money, I would assume. But so we have by the end of this, Madeline is to reconsider some things. And so Max is thinking, oh, Madeline's going to pull out and like she's going to be done with this con because we made our money. And Madeline's like, you know what? Like, I think I'm going to stick with this one. Because Madeline's like, I don't want to keep going on and having to try to keep, like, kind of continue to go after these rich guys. And, like, at some point she has to figure out a way to just call it quits. So Max is like, well, are you sure about that? Madeline's like, well, yeah, I'm sure. And so Max is like, you really fall for this guy, like, haven't you? And Madeline's like, no, I just really want to, like, see this through. So it even gets to the point where I think Max ends up getting, like, himself kind of in trouble, where he's feeling that, like, people are coming for him. So Madeline goes on and is now with Richard. Seemingly things are working out. Richard's getting into some poor health, and so we find out that Richard dies. And so at the will reading, we find out that both Madeline and both Tom are to possibly find out what they're going to be getting from this will. Tom was to also want to put an investigation together about the money that he lost out on. And when he goes on and gets the money from his will, that is to be, of course, fairly substantial, we have Tom who wants to go on and do a whole investigation about the money that he had lost. So, but we'll get to that in a second. So we come to find that this guy comes in who's the officiate to the will, or whatever, the guy who is to tell the people who got what from the will. We have this guy go on and state that Madeline's character gets most of the estate and whichever of Richard. So we of course have Madeline. It's like, all right, like I'm in like the freaking billions, and this is amazing, and blah 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 blah. So Madeline is just like, yeah, like this is great. And so she's like going to all these stores and buying all these things. It's great. So Madeline is to go on and tell Tom that she doesn't know if she could really go on and carry Richard's business. And that Madeline is to really heavily apologize to Tom. And so we then have Tom, who is going on and doing this whole investigation, trying to figure out where that money had went, and so on and so forth. So Madeline is talking to Tom, and she's like, why are you even going through this investigation? And Tom is like, well, like, I just want to see this through. And Madeline's like, you just want to see her again. You just want to see the girl that got to you. So Madeline is to tell Tom, it's like, well, like, you know what you really should do? Like, you should really just grow up. Like, you should just accept your losses and just move on. And the guy is just like, no, like, I just really need to I just need to look into this. So Tom looks into it. There's an investigation being done. And so they find out that this is to be Sandra. They find out that this is who, like, this girl really is. And, like, she disappeared at some point. And so it's like, oh, okay, all right. So, like, I would have thought it would have, like, just ended there. But they go on to find this girl. And so, like, Tom, being the person who wants to just kind of see this whole through, Tom is to have, of course, Sandra be at this place, and he just want to make sure that she gets better and wants her being taken care of, and also, like, for her to just to be kind of watched over all the time. As, like, Madeline's like, well, yeah, like, I think there should be a person that is to be watching over her. And so the security guy is like, yeah, like, we're gonna have like 24-hour like surveillance watching this girl. So Madeline goes on to talk with Sandra, and so Sandra knows who Madeline is. And so Sandra is to state that Max ran out on her as Sandra was waiting for Max and he didn't show up. And so Sandra had gone on and gotten very high, and so Madeline's telling Sandra, it's like, well, what can I do just to make you happy? And so Sandra's like, I want to see Max again. Like, do whatever you need to do to have me see Max again. I want him to see what he has gone on and done to me now that he had ran away. And so Madeline tries calling Max through his phone, and the further and further she tries to consistently call Max, the more Madeline just starts to realize that she made a mistake by not sticking with Max. She realizes what a stupid idea that was. And so that Madeline wants Max back. So Max answers the phone call, and Madeline's like, well, yeah, like, I really want you back. And Max is just like, well, okay, all right. Like, okay. So Max comes back, meets up with Madeline and Sandra, and, like, Madeline comes up with this kind of clever way of stating that that her and Sandra are just going to go for this walk, and they go into this walk to meet up with Max, and so that all of a sudden leads Tom to be with his security, and Tom is just very upset at this point to realize that Sandra probably doesn't really love him, that maybe she is to be more interested in Max, so on and so forth, and it gets to the escalation of now Tom is to take this gun from this security guard and is now waving around this gun. And so Madeline's like, oh my god, oh my god. So we have at one point where they try to, like, rustle the gun out of Tom's hands because he's whipping around and he's going to shoot somebody. So the gun ends up dropping. We have Madeline that grabs the gun because she's very unsure about what's going on. And Tom gets closer and closer to Madeline, and the gun goes off, and Tom gets shot and falls over. And I'm like, wait a minute. It's like, what? All right. But in the back of my mind, I'm still like, but this is the song that never ends. So that's what kind of, like, happened to me in this film. So we have Madeline and Max and Sandra here that are now to realize that they have a huge sum of money, and we're having certain people that are thinking like, oh, okay, well, like Madeline is going to be like charged with murder, and so Madeline's like, no, 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 like I don't want to go to jail for this. And so she's like, well, hey, like if I go on and if I give up all of my money, will like that just kind of let this all go away? And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I think we can make that deal. And like Madeline was also to like threaten the security guards, like, well, hey, I know about your wife, I know about this, I know about your kid's college fund, I know everything about you. And so it's like, hey, do not test me. But it seems like they figured out a way to really test her very well. So Madeline goes on and gives up the money, and they just kind of go off in this plane. Sandra, Madeline, Max, they basically have gotten away with murder at this point, and we have the security guards who are like, well, hey, just make it look like a robbery. So Max, Madeline, and Sandra are now on this plane, and they're like, okay, like we're gonna get out of here, and we're probably gonna start all over again, and we're just gonna figure out what our next thing is. So all of a sudden we have Madeline and we have Max. We're on this plane, and so we have Sandra that's like, you know what, I'm feeling a little sick. So Madeline's like, oh, okay, all right. So we go to the bathroom. So we all of a sudden have Madeline who goes back to the bathroom where Sandra is supposedly at, and Sandra's gone. So come to find out what had happened was Sandra was to meet up with Tom. Realizing that Sandra was probably not going to get a big cut of this money, she went and had herself turn around and talked to Tom and told him everything. So we went on to have Tom and his security men that were working out every bit of every scenario of how this is all going to play out. So it was going to play out the way it was. So Tom would go on and get this money back to him, and it would all just work out in the end. So we would go on to have this whole long con thing where by the end of this, they're back at that bookstore, and we have these two characters that are going on and reciting the things that they said to one another at the early part of this movie to kind of finish up this film. And so we have Tom who is closing up this bookstore, and that's how the movie ends. So with that said, I thought that this movie was, again, it was fun. I enjoyed it. It was good. Let me know in the comments below if there's any massive thing that I forgot about, because I'm sure that probably happens because there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of stuff to talk about here. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.